The scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air, wrapping the Parker household in a festive warmth, but the chill in my mother-in-law's voice cut through it like an icy wind. Those foster kids aren't real family, Emily. I can't believe you're bringing them to our annual portrait session. I stood in her immaculate kitchen, fingers tightening around the pie dish I had spent the morning baking. Across from me, Sandra adjusted a gleaming ornament on her perfectly curated Christmas tree, as if she hadn't just dismissed the 3 children who had brought light back into my life. At 34, I never imagined I'd have to justify my place as a mother, especially not to a woman who had spent the last decade reminding me that I couldn't have real children of my own. They have names, Sandra, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the fire simmering beneath my skin. Lily is 7, Marcus is 10, and Jack is 13, and they are as much a part of this family as anyone else. Sandra turned, her manicured hands clasped primly in front of her designer sweater. Oh honey, she cooed, the condescension in her tone as sharp as ever. I know you mean well, but these temporary arrangements aren't the same as real grandchildren. I can't get attached to children who might disappear in a few months. The irony of her words nearly made me laugh. If only she knew. If only she understood who these children truly were. But that revelation wasn't for tonight. Not yet. They're not temporary, I said, setting the pie down on her pristine marble countertop. I'm in the process of adopting them. The ornament in her hand slipped, shattering against the hardwood floor. Adopting, she echoed, her voice rising an octave. Without consulting the family? What about Robert's inheritance, his family name? Right on cue, my husband walked in, arms full of carefully wrapped gifts. I'd asked him to leave the kids in the car until I had spoken to Sandra, and judging by her reaction, that had been the right call. What's wrong with adoption, Mom? Robert asked, setting the gifts beside my pie. Emily's been fostering them for 8 months. They're amazing kids. Sandra's lips pressed into a thin line. Amazing or not, they aren't Parkers. They don't share our blood, our history. What will people at the country club think? Robert's hand found mine, his grip warm and reassuring. He knew how much Sandra's words stung, how they reopened wounds we had spent years trying to heal. We have fought for a family, suffered through 3 miscarriages, and finally made peace with the idea that biology did not define love. And then, miraculously, we had found Lily, Marcus, and Jack. A family born not of blood, but of love. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, they have more history with this family than you realize. I scrolled to the old newspaper clipping I had found while researching the children's past. A discovery that would shatter Sandra's carefully crafted reality. But before I could show her, she waved a dismissive hand. I don't need to hear their sob story, Emily. It doesn't change anything. The family portrait is for real Parkers. I won't have it turned into some charity project. Robert stepped forward, his voice firm. Mom, that's enough. The kids are coming to the portrait session. That's final. Then I'll reschedule with Patricia, Sandra snapped, referring to her favorite photographer. I won't have my Christmas cards ruined by what, Sandra? I interrupted, my patience finally snapping. By 3 incredible children who have endured more hardship than you could imagine. Who have brought more love into this family in 8 months than your country club has in years. A thick silence filled the space between us. The only sound the distant melody of Christmas carols drifting from the living room. Sandra stared at me stunned. In 12 years of marriage I had never spoken to her like this. Robert exhaled. I think we should go home. We'll discuss the portrait session later. As we stepped outside, the cold air wrapped around me, but it couldn't quell the fire burning in my chest. In the car, the kids waited patiently, their laughter filling the space like the very warmth Sandra refused to let in. As I glanced back at the house, I saw Sandra standing at the window, watching us. I thought of the envelope tucked safely in my home office. The DNA test results proving that Lily, Marcus, and Jack weren't just any children. They were the grandchildren of Sandra's long-lost sister, the woman she never spoke about, the secret she had buried for decades. Tomorrow's portrait session would change everything. Robert squeezed my hand as he drove, his silent support grounding me. You okay? He asked softly. I exhaled, gazing at the kids in the backseat, their faces alight with excitement over what movie to watch that night. I will be, I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. Because family isn't about blood, it's about love. But in this case, it just so happened to be both. And Sandra Parker was about to learn that in the most unexpected way possible. The morning air was crisp, the kind that turned breath into clouds and painted the sky a sharp winter blue, perfect for family portraits. As I carefully braided Lily's dark curls, I couldn't help but notice how much she resembled the old photographs I found of Sandra's sister. Those same deep brown eyes, that same quiet, knowing smile. "Do you think Grandma Sandra will like my dress?" Lily twirled in her blue velvet dress, the fabric catching the light as she spun. It matched her brother's sweaters, a deliberate choice. The hope in her voice made my chest tighten. "She's going to love it, sweetheart," I assured her, even as doubt curled in my stomach. Could Sandra truly be called Grandma yet? The DNA results in my purse suggested she could, but acceptance was something else entirely. Jack, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, already looked uncomfortable in his neatly pressed clothes. "She won't. She hates us," he muttered, his voice carrying the blunt certainty of a 13-year-old who had seen too much. "She doesn't hate you," Robert said as he stepped up behind Jack, resting a steadying hand on his son's shoulder. "She's just set in her ways. But she'll come around." His gaze met mine, the silent determination there mirroring my own. Today would change everything. When we arrived at the portrait studio, Sandra was already there, instructing Patricia, the photographer, with clipped precision. Her expression tightened as we entered, her eyes scanning our coordinated outfits before landing on the children. "I see you brought everyone," she said, the smile on her lips not quite reaching her eyes. "Of course we did, Mom," Robert replied evenly. "We're all family here." Before I could stop him, Marcus, the quietest of the three, stepped forward. "Mrs. Parker, I have something to show you." He reached into his pocket and carefully unfolded a photograph. A faded image of his birth mother, Sandra's niece, taken just months before the accident that had left the children orphaned. Sandra's face paled as she stared at the picture. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "It was my mom's," Marcus said, holding his head high. "She told me it was taken at Pine Grove." I saw the name hit Sandra like a blow. Pine Grove. The family's summer home, the place she and her sister, Catherine, had spent childhood summers before their relationship fractured beyond repair. Sandra turned sharply toward me. "Emily," her voice was taut, controlled. "What is this about?" I exhaled, acutely aware of the photographer's assistant pretending not to eavesdrop. Maybe we should step outside for a moment. But Sandra didn't move. Her grip on the photograph tightened. "No, I want to know now." I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing against the neatly folded DNA test results. "These children," I said quietly, "are Catherine's grandchildren. Their mother, Sarah, was your niece." I discovered the connection while researching their background for the adoption. Silence settled over the studio, thick and heavy. Even the children, normally so restless, stood frozen. Sandra's lips parted, but no words came at first. Her gaze flickered over the kids, taking them in, truly seeing them for the first time. "Catherine," she murmured, and for the first time in 12 years, I saw unshed tears in my mother-in-law's eyes. "I haven't spoken to her since." "Since she married someone you didn't approve of," I finished gently. "These are her grandchildren, Sandra. Your family, the family you said didn't belong in your portraits." Sandra sank into the nearest chair, still staring at the photograph. "Sarah," she whispered. "I never even knew she had children. After Catherine left." She trailed off, her eyes finally lifting to meet Lily's. "She has her eyes." "Yes," I said. "And Marcus has your mother's smile. Jack has the Parker height. Turns out Catherine married a distant cousin of Robert's father." Robert stepped forward then, his voice steady. "Mom, these kids aren't just a temporary arrangement. They're our family, in every possible way. By love, by choice, and yes, by blood." For the first time since we'd arrived, Sandra moved with purpose. She crossed the room slowly, stopping in front of Lily, who hesitated before peeking up at her. Sandra's breath hitched. "I've been so foolish," she said, her voice breaking. "So caught up in appearances that I couldn't see what was right in front of me." Lily, with the kind of forgiveness only children possess, reached out and took Sandra's hand. "It's okay, Grandma Sandra. Do you want to see my dress? Mommy helped me pick it for the pictures." And just like that, the ice began to thaw. Sandra pulled all three children into her arms, holding them tightly, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. Patricia, ever the professional, discreetly adjusted her camera, capturing this unexpected moment of reconciliation. What followed wasn't the stiff, perfectly posed session Sandra had likely envisioned. Instead, Patricia captured real moments. Sandra smoothing Lily's hair, laughing through her tears as Marcus showed her more family photos. Jack finally, relaxing enough to smile. As I watched Sandra transform before my eyes, I realized that sometimes family isn't just about history, it's about choices, about opening doors that once seemed closed forever. The real work of healing would take time. But as Sandra fussed over her children, straightening their collars, brushing away stray strands of hair, I knew we had taken the first step toward becoming the family we were always meant to be. The changes in Sandra over the next few months were remarkable to watch. The woman who once cared only about appearances and social status now spent her weekends helping Lily plant a butterfly garden, teaching Marcus to bake her secret family recipes, and attending every single one of Jack's soccer games. One Sunday afternoon, as I watched her showing the kids old family albums in our living room, she called me over. "Emily, look what I found," she said, pulling out a yellowed envelope. Inside was a letter from her sister Catherine, dated just months before the accident that claimed Sarah's life. "I never opened it," Sandra admitted, her voice thick with regret. "I was too proud, too stubborn. And now," she looked at the children, who were absorbed in photos of their grandmother as a young woman. "Now I'll never get to make things right with her." I sat beside her on the couch. "You're making things right with them," I said softly. "That counts for something." She nodded, carefully unfolding the letter. As she read, tears rolled down her cheeks. "She wanted to reconcile," she whispered. "She wrote about Sarah, about the kids. She wanted us to be a family again. And now we are," Robert said, joining us with a tray of hot chocolate. Another new tradition Sandra had started. Just not in the way anyone expected. The transformation wasn't just in Sandra's relationship with the kids. She'd become a different kind of mother-in-law to me too. Gone were the subtle jabs about my inability to have biological children, replaced by genuine appreciation for how I brought her family back together. One evening, as we prepared for another family dinner, now a weekly occurrence, Sandra pulled me aside. "I've been thinking," she said, nervously smoothing her skirt. "I'd like to set up a trust fund for the children's education. Not because they need to meet some social standard," she added quickly, "but because it's what Catherine would have wanted for her grandchildren." I hugged her, something that would have been unthinkable a few months ago. "She would have loved that," I said. "And she would have loved seeing you with them now." The adoption became final on a bright spring morning. Sandra sat in the front row of the courthouse, beaming with pride as the judge made it official. The kids were legally ours, though they'd been ours in heart since the day they arrived. "You know," Sandra said at the celebration lunch afterward, "I always thought family was about maintaining the Parker name, about keeping our bloodline pure and proper." She looked around the table at our beautifully blended family, Robert and me, the kids, even Patricia the photographer who'd become a close friend. "But real family is this. It's love and forgiveness and second chances." Lily climbed into her lap, something that now seemed perfectly natural. "Tell us more about Grandma Catherine," she asked, a request that had become common at family gatherings. And Sandra did, sharing stories she'd kept locked away for decades. With each tale, the missing pieces of our family history fell into place, and the children learned of the grandmother they'd never met through the aunt who finally opened her heart to them. That summer, Sandra suggested reopening Pine Grove, the summer home she'd closed after her falling out with Catherine. "It's time to make new memories there," she said. "Happy ones." Watching the kids run through the same gardens where their grandmother had played, seeing Sandra teach them the same family traditions she'd once shared with Catherine, I realized we created something beautiful from the ashes of old pain. "You know," Sandra said one evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, "I spent so many years focused on what family should look like that I almost missed out on what it could be. Thank you, Emily, for not giving up on me." I squeezed her hand, remembering the tense Christmas gathering that had started it all. "Thank you for being brave enough to change." The sound of laughter drew our attention to the yard, where Robert was chasing the kids through the sprinkler, all of them soaked and happy. Sandra's perfect lawn was getting muddy. Her carefully tended flowers were slightly trampled, and she didn't seem to mind at all. "Catherine would have loved this," she said softly. "She always said I needed to loosen up, to see that life was meant to be lived, not just photographed and displayed. As if to prove her point, Lily ran up and pulled us both into the water fight, designer clothes and all. And there we were, the proper Sandra Parker, laughing and playing in the mud with her great nieces and nephew, finally understanding what real family meant. In the end, it wasn't about blood or status or perfectly posed portraits. It was about love, acceptance, and the courage to open our hearts to unexpected joy. Our family might not have come together in the traditional way, but it was real as the laughter echoing through the summer evening, as real as the love that had brought us all home.